So what does it look like a man courting a woman in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, they go out, they talk, the affection isn't necessarily physical. It's just not. They just don't touch very much. Which, as a Westerner, is mad confusing if you're trying to date, right? Because you're like,
I'm like, she's not into it, man. She's not into it.
Exactly, right? Like you try to touch him, and they're like, ooh, right? And it's like, all right, well, that's obviously I've been shot down there. She must not be interested. And then they'll call and be like, well, aren't we going to see each other again? And I'm like, but you were afraid for me to touch. So it made dating really confusing, man. But like, yeah, they just don't. That's just not how they roll. They just don't really touch. I mean, it's one of the things that makes. I've been to 33 countries.
Wow.
Good
for you.
Been as far south as Ushuaia, the southern tip of South America.
Can't pronounce it.
Far north as the Arctic Circle of Norway. And I've never been anywhere that has a culture that's as different as Japan is. Just everything about the way that they do things and the way that they think and operate. And like I said, it's not necessarily better, but it's just very, very different from everywhere else. And one of them is the fact that they just don't touch.
So let's talk about the courtship process in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple things. You mentioned to me that, obviously they touch it in the home, they make babies, but I've heard that the birth rate is super low there.
I think that's a big part of it, is it's a lack of physical affection.
Okay, but people are dating and they're getting married and having children. So that's not the lack of physical touch is not preventing them from like creating families directly, right? Or what's the issue?
But a lot of marriage, I mean, obviously not, things are changing, cultures evolve, but traditionally marriage here was a very, very pragmatic thing. Right. It's like, all right, well, this dude earns this much money.
Okay.
So he should be a good provider. So this woman's like, all right, well, he looks like he'd be a really good provider. I'm going to go for this guy.
And then what are the reason they go for the woman?
And then for the guy, he's like, all right, well, she's really cute. She looks like she'd be stable. She looks like she'd be a big mother or a good mother.
I'm big mother. You said.
Sorry. Not my mistake, right? But I mean, it was just very pragmatic like that, right? So it was more about like, and then you have like the social pressure to have a family and all that, right? Because in Japan, social pressure is a big thing, and there's a very positive side to it,
okay,
and there's a negative side to it.
Well, before we get to that, you're saying there's this pressure to have a family, but why would the birth rate be low? If
it's because a lot of people, they marry, but they don't actually love each other.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying? Like they're marrying because getting married is what you're supposed to do. So you find somebody that you think would be like that ticks all the boxes, and they're like, okay, yeah, let's see, physical attractive enough, mentally stable, comes from a good family. Okay, she's good, and then, but it's not necessarily. But
when the woman even if she was with somebody that she didn't like. Wouldn't she still, whether she or he, wouldn't they still have the desire to raise children in some capacity, regardless if they like each other or not, because they already signed up to be together anyway?
Well, that's what I mean. Is they want to be good parents, and you have a lot of couples where the mother absolutely loves the child, but she doesn't really care about the father anymore because he made the babies. That was his job done. And then he's like, all right, I made the babies. My job's done. And then he just kind of does his own thing.
I know, but I'm trying to understand why the birth rate is low. If they're still having
because there's like I said, there's a lot of loveless marriages, right? So, and you can't really make babies without love, man. I mean, you can.
I know a couple, well, I don't know, but I'm sure a couple people who had one night stands that created a baby. Doesn't mean they love each other.
You know what I mean? Like, but
I get it.
You have to be in the mood.
I got it.
You know what I'm saying? And like, you have to want to do it with that person.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one of the reasons why the birth rate is so low. I think the other reason that the birth rate is so low is purely because the work ethic here is so intense. And that came from the World War. That actually came from the rebuilding effort after World War II, So they were like, all right, everything's been decimated. We got to rebuild. We got to rebuild. We got to rebuild. We got to work 50 hours a week. We got to work 80 hours a week until we rebuild Japan.
Yeah.
And then that's where it came from.
Yeah.
And then it just never went away. You know what I mean? So you still have people that are working, 60, 70 hours a week, like especially the guys.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're working that much, like you're too tired to want to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you're just mentally worn out. Like all you're gonna do is sleep. You get home at midnight every night. You wake up at 6 a.m. and go back the next day. When do you have time
to even have the children, let alone raise them?
Yeah, right. Or when do you even have time to like go out on a date with your wife or to like flirt? When like your mental space is so heavily occupied with your work, right? So that's another reason. The birth rate thing. It's a very complex issue.
I'm sure it is. Yeah,
it's not one thing, but it's a lot of different things together. This could be like a 5-hour conversation by itself.
I'm sure. But what you said sparked something in my brain where I remember when I was in Japan, there was this woman that I met there. I wasn't hitting on her or anything. Relax, everybody. I'm not out here going to Japan just to meet women. I went to Japan and there was this woman that was a friend of some of the guys that I went to Japan with. Mind you, like all the friends I went to Japan with, they were all Asian. I'm like the only melanated guy in every event we went to. But like I was having a conversation with this woman, and then we got to talking about some of the things we're talking about here. And she said something very peculiar where, how like in the United States, it's like very taboo for like to be fraternizing at work to some capacity, dating someone at work and so on and so forth. Right. So like HR will be on your case if there's any type of like, things like that, that's out of bounds. But what she said, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, or if there's like a different perspective coming from you. She said in Japan, an example for a woman going into a workplace, right? She'll go to school. She'll go to a very good school, be educated, and get a good job. She'll go to HR to sign up for that job or to be interviewed. And HR will be like, "Oh, you're cute. You'll be really good for the guys here." That's what she said. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. And I'm like, really? I'm like, why is that? She's like, well, typically in Japan, this is what she's told me, this Japanese woman. She said, a lot of women and men meet at work. Yeah, to your point, they work so much that's also who they socialize with the most.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's completely true. Almost everybody that I know is like, yeah, I met my husband or I met my wife at work.
Right. It's like, oh, I realized he was a good suitor at work. So,
yeah.
But to her point, she also said, once a woman gets married in Japan after meeting her guy at work, it's looked down upon if she continues to work.
That can be a thing too.
Yeah.
I mean, I know women that do.
Okay.
But yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a lot. It's interesting because there's a lot of